Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to our random review. Today's random review is Mr. Klein from 1976, directed by Jospeh Losey, starring Alain Delon and Jeanne Moreau and Michael Lonsdale. This is in a Jospeh Losey box set on DVD that I have, which has 6 of his films. But obviously recently Losey to Blu-ray has become a thing. There's 3 of his films on Indicator Blu-ray, and Studiocanal are or have released some of his films in Blu-ray and are releasing more of his films in Blu-ray, including Mr. Klein, which is coming out in September, I think, along with not only a Blu-ray but a 4K of The Servant. So in this 6 film set, we have The Sleeping Tiger, which is one of his early films, which he directed under a pseudonym, because obviously he was blacklisted, and then he went to make films in the UK, and then to Europe, and then back to the UK. He is a pretty interesting filmmaker that I'll probably do an In the Frame episode of at some point. This also has The Criminal with Stanley Baker, which has been released on Studiocanal Vintage Classics Blu-ray. Eva or Eve, which is on Indicator with Stanley Baker and Jeanne Moreau. The Servant, which like I said is coming out on 4K in Studiocanal as well as Blu-ray. Accident, and The Go-Between, which has been released on Studiocanal Vintage Classics. And like I said, Mr. Klein, which is coming on Studiocanal Blu-ray. So they each get their own disc, which is quite good. I would say if you're not into Blu-ray, it's a really good set to pick up because the prints are actually very good. But for me, the Mr. Klein Blu-ray I will be upgrading to, because it has that beautiful kind of steely blue, melancholy, kind of muted colours of Jean-Pierre Melville. There's a lot in this film that will kind of remind you of Melville, apart from the fact Alain Delon's the lead. So like I said, Losey is an interesting character. For me anyway, I kind of prefer him when he's a bit more straightforward and direct. Some of his films, I think he was influenced by the Nouvelle Vague. He was influenced by European cinema of the 60s, the 50s and 60s at the time. And some of his films, like Eve, like Accident, he made 4 films that were written by Harold Pinter. Sometimes he gets a little bit too artsy, but it's just interesting, an American trying to do art house films. Sometimes they work, sometimes it doesn't quite work, and a lot of his films are just a touch too long. Mr. Klein is one of my favourite Loseys, but even it is probably maybe 10 minutes too long. But all that being said, what's the film actually about? That would be a good start. Well, it stars Alain Delon. It's made in 1976. It's set in 1942 in Paris, and it has this very arresting and disturbing opening scene. There's this middle-aged woman who is naked, trying to cover her dignity as she is being inspected by a doctor in a very big examination room, which is very spare. He just has an assistant sitting there, and he's taking all of her measurements and measuring her nostril depth and her earlobes and her hair and getting her to walk and what her hips look like, and it's a really kind of disturbing, startling opening scene. But we'll get to that later. And then in contrast to that, we're then introduced to Alain Delon's character, who is an art dealer who is in the process of brokering a deal for this man who is selling a painting to him. And we kind of work out that Delon's character, Robert Klein, of the title of the film, is essentially buying art from Jews so they can get money to get out of Paris, because the German occupation is happening in the beginnings of the Vichy government. So he's profiting essentially from these people fleeing the city and getting out of the city and the country. It's one of those classic films about a character at the start of the film who thinks he has the world by the lapels and is in control of his life, and regardless what other people are suffering and other people are going through, he's above all that. But as we know and as we love, we kind of like these films where characters end up, they're not quite as secure as they think they are. So this one again, it looks wonderful. Obviously Alain Delon is just about in every scene, but it's interesting because this is 76, so he's a little bit older. He still has those piercing eyes, but he's a little bit jaded, he's a little bit melancholy. He has a young girlfriend, the lawyer friend of his, Pierre, who's played by Michael Lonsdale, who we sadly lost last year, the Bond villain from Moonraker. You have a feeling that he had something to do with his wife as well, but he just has this kind of jaded, melancholy kind of character that he's not really that interested in like sex with his girlfriend. He just kind of has her around the house, at one point telling her to go to bed and not get out of bed. So as he's seeing one of these characters who's selling him art, he opens his door and he has been delivered a copy of a Jewish newspaper, which is only by subscription, which he takes as kind of not an insult but a kind of joke that he's being left this, which suggests that he's Jewish. So he goes to the publisher and he wants to find out why he got this delivered and who bought the subscription for him. So he doesn't find that out initially, but he goes to the police, and of course the police want to investigate up to a point, and it turns out there's another Robert Klein who may be using Alain Delon's identity to hide himself. So the film, again, there's a kind of Kafka thing going throughout the film as well, about Alain Delon trying to find this guy to prove that the other person exists. He goes to the address where the other Robert Klein has been staying, and the landlady thinks that Alain Delon is the other person. So it's another example of a doppelganger film. Whether we see the other Robert Klein or not, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you how it ends though. And throughout the film, so it's part doppelganger story, it's part detective story, it's part a story about obsession and how your obsession can get in the way of your relationships with other people. I mean, when his girlfriend leaves, he's not really interested because he just goes to the 9th degree to try and find out who this other Robert Klein is and to try and catch up with him. He goes out, there's a whole section where he goes out to this country house where Jean Moreau is, and they are intending to meet the other Robert Klein, and there's a whole piece about how the other Robert Klein may be in the resistance, and that goes down another plot. But in the end, it's how far your desire and obsession to know the truth can actually put your life in danger. And again, it's very much like The Vanishing by Jospeh Losey, as far as the need to know the truth. At what cost is that? Is it going to actually cost you your life to know the truth? And is that worth it? That, yes, you're going to probably die, but at least you know the truth. The last 15 minutes are pretty astonishing and pretty chilling, or to me anyway. I can only speak to my experience with the film, but just really moving and sad and pretty unforgettable. It won 3 César awards for director, best film, and I think Delon got best actor. He gives another, he has a kind of, it's an interesting double bill with La Samurai, obviously, just because of the look of the film and his performance. He wears a hat in this as well, unbelievable. But there is just a kind of, yes, there's a kind of melancholy to his character Jeff Costello, I think it's in La Samurai, but there's just more of a kind of, even though here's a man who at the start of the film has everything and is in control, you can still tell that he's not actually happy even with having everything, and he only kind of has kind of wry smiles, but you can see he is an important figure in the community. You know, people kind of orbit him, you know, women are drawn to him because, well, he's Alain Delon. But it's an interesting portrayal. It's very pulled back. I mean, Delon was never, you know, that much of an extroverted actor particularly. He was always kind of within himself. But this is another tremendous performance. If you're an Alain Delon fan, it's a must-see. I think it's one of Jospeh Losey's best. Again, because it's less trying to be an art house film, and it does have a bit more of a narrative drive. Like I said, it's still probably, it's not perfect, it's still probably about 10 minutes too long, but it's also a wonderful film about the Vichy government and the taking over of the French by the Nazis. You know, there's a line at one point of a woman pretty much saying, oh, the French police would never let this happen, you know, when there's rumours of what's actually going to happen to Jewish people. You know, again, back to the first scene in the film, which, like I said, is pretty startling, when you have this naked middle-aged woman being measured and poked and prodded. So that's kind of to garner evidence about whether people are Jewish or not. Do they look Jewish? You know, as the plot thickens with Delon's character and this idea of, does the other Robert Klein exist or not exist? Delon needs evidence from his parents and his grandparents and great-grandparents whether there's any Jewish heritage in their family or not. But I think another reason why the film is so good, because it's almost about Losey himself, because it's a film about a man trying to find himself, or a man trying to find out who he is. And I think throughout Losey's career, with the blacklisting and having to move from country to country making films, I think it's an interesting film from Losey's perspective, as far as what kind of person he is, what kind of man he is, what kind of director he is. Is he, you know, an art house? Is he Hollywood? Is he somewhere in between? So it's a film about somebody finding out who they are, and I think it's an interesting film if you look at Losey's career and Losey the man himself. On the indicator releases of Losey films, Secret Ceremony, which is one of the strangest indicator titles, and that's saying something, with Elizabeth Taylor and Mia Farrow and Robert Mitchum, and Time Without Pity, which is a really good little potboiler of Michael Redgrave. Jospeh Losey's son talks about his father and talks about, you know, I think his son's on the indicator release of Eve as well, with Jeanne Moreau, and that's fascinating discussions trying to put together what Losey's mindset was and what he was thinking when he was making these films. I mean, I wouldn't say Losey is like a great director, but I think when he's on, he's very good, and even if he perhaps doesn't reach the ambition they perhaps wanted to, these films are always interesting, I think. And like I say, Mr. Klein is one of my favourite ones, and certainly one well worth checking out. And again, it will be one that I'll be upgrading when it comes out in September on Studiocanal Vintage Classics. But again, like I said, if you're not into Blu-ray, this DVD set, the prints are really good. So I would recommend picking that up if you're not going to pick up the Blu-ray. But this is just another wonderful, interesting little film, and like I said, the last 15 minutes are just stunning stuff. So thanks very much for watching. Please let me know if you've seen Mr. Klein by Jospeh Losey, starring Alain Delon, or let me know what your favourite Jospeh Losey film is, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying cheerio.